What the Tech is sponsored by Hover.com. Domain names made simple. Go to gfq.hover.com and get 10% off your entire purchase. And by Stitcher Radio. Listen on the go via the Stitcher mobile app. For more information, go to stitcher.com/GFQ. Welcome everybody to another What the Tech. I am Andrew Zarian, and I'm joined with Paul Thurrott. By Paul Thurrott. I'm joined with Paul Thurrott. I'm joined with Paul Thurrott. And I can't hear him because now there's no audio from Paul. There we go. This is awful. I have to tell you this.
This is such an amateurish thing.
I have to tell you what's been going on. I know we're such amateurs today. We over the last couple of weeks here, we have been upgrading the studio. And throughout the upgrade, we're breaking things every step of the way. Last week, we upgraded our audio system, and we upgraded the way that we route in calls and phone calls into the studio. And it seems to have broke whatever we had put in place 3 years prior, and everything is now funky. The audio, some people...
You don't mess with wiring, you know?
I know, and I should have never done this, but I did. But this is What the Tech. This is the tech show. Technically, we're just going to talk about tech problems throughout the entire show. No, we don't discuss tech news. We discuss things happening in technology. Last week was a lot of tech news because of the Microsoft stuff, but there's, again, a lot of news and a lot of Microsoft stories still. But we're going to try to cover everything a little bit. I know Paul had a major problem with Windows 8, and I'm dying to know how you fix this.
It's more of a workaround than a fix.
It's more of a workaround. Okay, so... what happened exactly? Because I know you were experiencing the issue last week.
Yeah. There were two issues, but the big one, the one I had seen on multiple computers, was a sudden system hang. You know, the mouse would move around, but you couldn't click on anything, and you knew it was just about to happen. And that you can't Control-Alt-Delete out of it. You can't get Task Manager to come up, and the only thing you can do eventually is just turn off the computer and then, reboot it. So... It's weird because there are days that go by where it never happens. There are days where it happens 5-7 times in the same day. It happened to me on my trips. It happened to it happens to me here at home, different computers.
No, and there's no, I guess, thing that you're doing that's causing it.
No. What I found out is that it has something to do with Sandy Bridge and newer Intel chipsets. It seems to, but not always, happen to people with SSD drives. That seems to be one of the
that's interesting
triggers in there. But it's definitely something to do with the Intel chipset stuff. That has been a constant for all of the people who've experienced it. Because actually, the thing that's happened since last week, of course, is that I wrote about it, and then I received over 500 emails from people most of whom had experienced the hang bug. Certainly,
yeah.
Many people had lots of workaround ideas or fix ideas and everything. I tried all of them. It's like I feel like the end of that Andy Kaufman movie, where I was like ready to try anything that would fix this. But
yeah.
I finally did find a workaround that several people suggested that does work, and it's just install Hyper-V. And
really?
Yeah, most people don't need Hyper-V. Obviously, it's a a hardware-based virtualization solution, but there's something about installing that. Maybe it bypasses the Intel chipset in some unique way or whatever it is, but it seems to work. Now, it may not work 100% of the time for everybody, but if you're experiencing this issue, the same issue I am, you have a Sandy Bridge or Ivy Bridge-based Intel PC, so you do have the hardware you need to run Hyper-V, and certainly running Hyper-V won't harm your computer in any way, and if it prevents this strange system hang from happening, then go for it. So
now, is Microsoft aware of this problem? Have they addressed it at all, or no? I mean, if you're getting 500 emails about the same problem, I'm sure that there's many more out there facing the same issue.
Well, it would be everyone who has an Intel Sandy Bridge or newer chipset. So yes, it's a lot of people. They tell me that they haven't seen this thing turn up in the telemetry data, although, as Rafael Rivera pointed out to me today, if the system is hanging, it's not generating the kind of data that they would get, so it's kind of unclear why they don't know about it or whatever, but they don't seem to. So I do know that it has been fixed in more recent builds of Windows 8. It won't be an issue in the final version.
Okay, so that's good.
Yeah, so
That's good. No, I actually throughout the week I've been using the Windows 8 laptop more and more because I do want to give it a chance and I do want to kind of get used to it. I've spoken about things that I'm not too crazy about, but I did get used to the way certain things work and using desktop shortcuts, like the key shortcuts.
Yeah.
It's a different way of computing, in my opinion. For many people, a lot of people don't use it. If you've been using these for years, and I think you're going to get the hang of it really quickly. But I never really used the key shortcuts. But it's
I use them. I use them a lot.
Okay, but you write. You write a lot, so you kind of do. You're used to doing it because of the text that you write. Control C, Control V.
Well, people going forward, people who are going to be using a keyboard and a mouse are going to fall into a kind of a power user category, right? I mean, I think there's going to be a much bigger audience using touch interfaces and tablet devices and that kind of thing. So today it seems like kind of a weird power user thing or, kind of an esoteric thing, but and maybe it always will be, I guess. But I think the type of people who stick with these kinds of computers, it behooves them to know these kinds of things.
Yeah, listen, I think it's all a matter of getting used to. Last week we were discussing the Surface. Then they had announced the Surface, I believe, it was Tuesday, right? Monday, yeah. So we did a show on Wednesday, so we spoke about it. But we didn't get a chance to talk about Windows Phone 8.
Yeah, I was in San Francisco for that event, but I think when we would have talked Tuesday, so that was before the event.
Yeah, so you were there.
Mm-hmm.
What did you think of it?
It's funny. I've known about Windows Phone 8 for a long, long time, and I've known a lot about Windows Phone 8 for a long, long time. So there was some new information for me at the show, which I was happy about because there's always that fear, you go out there for nothing or whatever. But I think it's great. I mean, the problem is you can't describe Windows Phone 8 as a slam dunk because you have to consider the fact that existing Windows Phone users are not going to be upgraded, and that puts a little bit of a cloud, over that whole thing which is unfortunate because Windows Phone 8 by and large is fantastic. It looks great. I mean, I don't have a device or anything like that, but just looking at what's going to be included in the system, it looks like this finally puts Windows Phone 8 on equal footing with the competition, no matter how you choose to look at it, right? Because there's always these weird caveats from reviewers like, well, Windows Phone would be good if it had this or whatever. And I think this eliminates all of those little issues, whatever they may be. Some of them are real, some are imagined.
But I mean, they are going to get some sort of upgrade. It's still going to look like Windows 8. They're getting, they're going to get the home screen upgrade. They're going to get tweaks. They're going to get fixes for Windows Phone 7, 8.
Yep.
So it's not a total disappointment.
No, and it's funny to watch people fall on the either side of the fence on that one because some people they see that and they say, you know what, that's great. Google does not do that for Android users, right? You either get it or you don't, and most times you don't. And at least Microsoft's doing something, and it's refreshing to see that kind of attitude. Some people are like, you know what, screw Microsoft. I invested in this platform, and how do they reward their early adopters by not upgrading them to the next OS? And people have tried to make comparisons like, well, it's like Windows 7 and Windows 8, or it's like this and that, and it's like, yeah, it's not really like any of those things. I mean,
it's a totally different thing.
It's a different platform, really. I mean, people, you hear things like Windows, and you think, well, Windows runs Windows apps. You're like, Windows Phone runs Windows Phone apps, and unfortunately, in the case of Windows Phone, it's a little more nuanced than that. Today's Windows Phone OS is based on Windows CE, which is a completely different operating system from Windows. And it supports two runtime engines, one for Silverlight apps and one for XNA apps, typically games, right? This is actually a hybrid model that lets you kind of split the difference between those two types. But those are the two runtimes. And Windows Phone 8 supports both of those runtimes, but it also supports the new runtime, which is basically, they're going to call it Windows RT, WinRT, which is unfortunate because it's not actually the exact same WinRT API or runtime that you get in Windows 8, but it's close. And certainly the underpinnings are the same.
I got this question a lot from viewers over the week. I got a bunch of emails because it was the week of Microsoft, and it's a big story, and we discussed it here on the show. A lot of people are wondering, how are developers, app developers, going to develop for the phone and for the desktop.
Right.
Because the desktop, let's say the desktop is the tablet. I think a lot of people have this misunderstanding. Windows RT is Metro apps.
Yep.
So if you're developing Metro apps, it's going to be on both, the full, I guess, Windows 8 and Windows RT. The only problem here is Windows Phone 8. If you're a developer, how are you going to how are you going to develop for both?
I don't have access to the developer tools yet, but I can tell you my understanding. First of all, the developer tools are going to be changing, so it's still going to be Visual Studio, but this is very interesting. The emulator, if you think about how when you develop a mobile app of any kind, you run the app in an emulator on the computer, and then of course you can run it on real hardware. The emulator in Visual Studio, I guess it's 2010 or whatever, Express for Windows 8 for Windows Phone is whatever it is. I'm not even sure what it is. But in Visual Studio 2012, the version for Windows Phone 8, that emulator is going to be Hyper-V. It's actually going to be running a virtualized version of the OS in Hyper-V. That suggests that Windows Phone and Windows Phone apps could, in fact, run on Windows 8 or at least on Windows RT. But my understanding is that won't be the case, which is one of those other questions that comes off. So I've actually gone off to the side on that discussion. But anyway, the way that Microsoft described developing is that obviously for what you might consider back-end code, just code modules that are pure code, if you can use the same languages, it's the same thing. So it's still C#, it's still Visual Basic. It could be C or C++. That code will go back and forth very easily. You can have solutions in Visual Studio that will have multiple projects, and you can have a project for Windows 8 and RT, and you can have a separate project for Windows Phone. And that the thing that's going to have to be different between the two is all of the stuff that glues the back-end code to widgets or whatever the UI elements are called. Because those things are, in fact, all completely different, even though they're going to look the same or look similar, and even though the APIs may be similar. And I'll just make one up because I actually don't know what they're called internally. But you can imagine that you want to send a notification in Windows 8, and that there are APIs for doing that they have certain names and namespaces and so forth, and that in Windows Phone 8 you also have the ability to send a notification or receive a notification, and that maybe those APIs, those namespaces and so forth, they might be different. And so you'll have to understand the differences between the two because they're not exactly the same. They're very similar, but they're not the same. And so it's not going to be, I don't think it's going to be terrible going back and forth, but it's not a write once kind of scenario.
Yeah. By the way, was that thunder?
Yeah, we're getting we've been getting biblical rainfall this week. And
you know what I did? I heard it and I looked out of my window and I'm like, but it's sunny.
Since I started talking, it started raining like really hard, and then thunder started occurring. Yeah.
I thought I'm hearing things.
No, it's happening.
Well, one thing, I do want to go over some of the hardware stuff that they announced. I found it interesting that they said early on in the presentation, listen, we're strategically leaving things out, and we're not going to talk about hardware at all.
Right. Well, we're just going to talk hardware a little bit.
They did. They spoke about NFC, which is they really put pressure on NFC and about their Google Wallet's competitor. It's going to support multi-core processing like we expected. New screen resolution, 1280 by 720. Now, is this a standard for all Windows Phone 8 devices?
No, they're going to be 3 screen resolutions, right? So there'll be a low-end version that looks. There you go. Can you hear it?
Well, the Microsoft gods are not happy.
Yeah, God is unhappy. That is the same as today, 800 by 480. And then there are 2 HD class resolutions, 1280 by 720 and 720 by 768.
Okay.
It's interesting because those things are very close. And of course, people are like, why would you have both of these, or what's the point of this? And the thing that I would just remind people is that on Windows Phone, you're not going to code to 3 different resolutions. You're going to basically code to 2, maybe even just 1, and it will scale it for you. So there's something, one of the properties of Metro and this nice text, that they have is that stuff automatically auto sizes. And so I suspect that the 2 HD class resolutions are just a way to ensure that all of the readily available screens that device makers will use can be used, that they're not going to limit it just to half of them. And I think that there aren't going to be any differences. And so if you're running on a 1280 by 720 or 1280 by 768, you're actually not going to see the difference. The tile arrangement will be the same. The way that apps and games load full screen will all look the same. So it's not something you really have to worry about. It's basically just HD.
Now, what do you think of the wallet feature that they've put in on their phones?
Yeah, it's comprehensive. I mean, I think that I'm not going to be able to describe this correctly, but they basically said, look, here's how Google does this part of it, and then Apple is doing this part in iOS 6, and we do all of it. I think that the one advantage Apple may have over Microsoft, and we'll have to wait and see how this goes, is that just through the sheer amount of devices they have out there, that third parties are going to support that wallet capability. They're not calling it wallet, but whatever it is, passport or whatever it was called. They'll probably support that pretty well. And of course, Apple, constrained as they are by not wanting to say, oh, by the way, the next iPhone is going to have NFC, couldn't talk about NFC, whereas Microsoft is saying, hey, look, we're going to have NFC. Yeah. So you get the full picture with Microsoft.
One thing that's fascinating is that they are going to have 3 major releases in the same time period. They're going to have their tablet come out, they're going to have Windows 8 come out, and they're going to have Windows Phone 8 come out all around the same time.
It's more than that. If you think about it, there's also a new version of Visual Studio, new version of Server.
New version
we'll have multiple versions. New version of Azure is coming out, which is the Cloud OS. And also a new version of Office, which may not be exactly at the same time, but you hear the word Office and you think, well, Office productivity software. It's not just that. It's like the servers. It's the online services, including the web-based versions. It's the mobile app versions, which almost certainly are going to be on multiple platforms, not just on Windows. And it's this whole ecosystem of stuff. I mean, this is maybe the single biggest, it's not one product wave, but set of product waves that Microsoft has ever released nearly simultaneously.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm wondering, I was reading about this, and I was wondering if it's done strategically to kind of fluff their numbers for the first quarter. And I'm thinking, I'm like, and I was talking to somebody about this, and they kind of get it, and they said, yeah, that's probably why they're doing it. The fourth quarter, you're going to have the holiday sales. You're going to have back to school. You're going to have holiday sales. And that's going to seep over to the first quarter of the new year, which is, a dead time period for many of these companies. But Microsoft will be able to prevail because of all these devices that they're releasing around the same time frame. Or maybe they're looking at a new way of releasing products. They might just do one sweep. Or this might be a trial for them. This is a new Microsoft. This is a totally new Microsoft.
They've always wanted to do this, right?
And we spoke about it last week about how Microsoft was labeled the boring company. But over the last decade, if we go back 10 years, if we go back to 10 years ago, the Xbox came out. That was the beginning of the shift for Microsoft. That was the first device that people could turn around and say, wow, you know what? This is really cool. Windows 95, of course, we know what happened with that, and that really revolutionized the PC market. But when you look at the Xbox, when you looked at Microsoft, you thought of, in a weird way, the Apple ads. I think to a lot of people that signified Microsoft. But you had the Xbox, you had the whole Longhorn thing happen where it never came out, but it was this idea. Hold on, we will not mention Longhorn anymore. I'm sorry.
By the way, if I disappear suddenly, it's going to be because of the weather, not because my computer freezes.
Okay, so I'll just talk to myself at that point. Yeah, but this is the last 10 years has been this huge shift for the company.
Yeah.
And I think this year is the first time that a lot of people that have been denying it or have not noticed it have noticed it. They have a revolutionary design for their phone. Totally different what everybody else is doing.
A lot of these younger guys, their frame of reference begins with the Apple ads you were talking about. I mean, they don't really go back in time far enough to understand what it was like before then. But this is even more impressive than you're suggesting in a way, because in 2003 to 2004, Microsoft was trying to really do something exciting with Longhorn. Yeah. The OS that shall not be named, failed miserably. Had to reset, came up with Vista. Everyone hated it, and that's the way things went. I mean, that caused a lot of changes at Microsoft. The old school Windows team left. The new team came in with Steven Sinofsky.
Do you think Sinofsky is responsible for the shift, or was it Ballmer also? Because people,
Well, I mean, ultimately, you have to blame or credit Ballmer. He's the CEO. So when things are going bad, we always, Steve Ballmer's got to go. But he was smart enough to put Sinofsky in place in Windows, and it's very clear what happened there. I mean, for job one, obviously, was cleaning up the mess that was Vista, whether it was real or imagined. But the thing that's super impressive to me is just that there was nothing really in his history to suggest that he would do something as revolutionary as Windows 8. And it's one of those things where, we're going to be debating Windows 8 for years to come, but love it or hate it or whatever,
it's a total
shift. Bold step.
Yeah. I mean, it's a total shift in direction, and it's not the Windows that we know.
Yeah, for it to come so quickly, is amazing. I mean, it never ceases to amaze that they were able to pull this off.
Well, yeah, I mean, when you look at Windows 7 and development of Windows 7, it took them, a while to kind of get to where they were, and they had Windows 7 pretty much should have been Vista. I mean, in reality.
Well, okay. So, except that Windows Vista was going to be something completely.
Well, it's going to be something.
It's hard to say. You got to that they were able to kind of pull Vista together into anything of any sort of shape at all is really sort of amazing. I mean, Vista actually happened very quickly. People tend to think of it as we went from 2001 to 2006 or whatever without an OS release, and that's not the case at all.
Yeah.
Longhorn was literally dropped right midstream, and Vista came together in less than 2 years. So, it's convenient to kind of dump on Vista and everything, but seriously, it was an impressive architectural change, and brought in some user interface elements that people now are getting awfully touchy-feely about now that they're going away.
Well, what if let's do this? What if Longhorn did come out?
Yeah.
What would have happened then?
What would have been the difference? I can't. There's no way to say that, but I'll give you one example of something that would have been very different. In 2003, Microsoft was talking about consolidating all of the notifications that come in from all of your apps and from the OS into a single location. It was going to be one of many functions of this thing they called the sidebar. And the Longhorn sidebar was actually really exciting. There was all kinds of stuff going on there, but it was a central thing. And remember, notifications is one of those deals, because that when you run, if Microsoft Word needs to tell you something, if Adobe Photoshop needs to tell you something, if Apple iTunes needs to tell you something, they all do it in their own way. There were different notification systems and looks and feels and everything. And the idea behind one of the ideas behind the sidebar in Longhorn was that all of that stuff would be consolidated into a single, cohesive, and consistent user interface. Okay. So that was blown away. It was destroyed. It never happened. But here we are. It's 2012. It is 9 years later. And Apple right now is about to release that exact user interface into Mountain Lion on the side. That it is almost exactly what Microsoft was building into Longhorn.
And here it is.
In fact, it's less capable, whatever. But just from a notification standpoint. In other words, now, of course, people who know how Apple does things will say, well, wait a minute, Paul, they put notifications into iOS first, and clearly they're just bringing that system over to the Mac OS. And I get it. But the system, the way it looks, the way it works, the way it consolidates all of those notifications, something Microsoft had in 2003, it just, during the reset, it was one of the things they had to get rid of just to ship the product. And of course, stupidly, Microsoft put something called Sidebar into Windows Vista.
And it was
that
awful.
Had nothing to do with that. Longhorn Sidebar was created by a completely different team. In fact, a very small team of people. The guys who did the Sidebar in Windows Vista, off the top of my head, if I remember correctly, were the guys who gussied up, Notepad and calculator and made a couple of the little games that were in Windows Vista as well. So it kind of gives you an idea of how serious of a concern that Sidebar was.
I remember, we've discussed Longhorn a couple times, but while you're talking, I remember seeing this video. I mean, when it came out, and the thing that I really liked was when it popped up, it said so and so was calling you, and you could pick up the call. I thought I'm like, oh my god, this is the greatest thing ever. You could take a phone call.
Yep. And Longhorn was visionary. Sometime next year or after next year or whatever. Skype will be integrated into Microsoft's product somehow, and that thing you're talking about will finally happen a decade later.
Yeah. I mean, but that's how it is in reality.
It really is, but that's how forward-leaning it was. I mean, they were going to replace the file system with an object-oriented relational database.
But they're still talking about that. See, that's the thing, that it's taken. They were talking about this a decade ago to redo their file management system, and they haven't redone it.
Microsoft, at the height of its power, was going to do something really radical. It was impressive. It may be too impressive. They got a little ahead of themselves, apparently, so they weren't able to pull it off.
Now, a build got released, right? A Longhorn build.
Several builds did, but none of them were anywhere like those things that they showed.
Because it wasn't a real demonstration. It was just
in retrospect, it should have been telling that the thing that they showed us on screen was nothing like the software they gave us that day. I mean, nothing. It was not even close.
Yeah. But listen, I think this is more innovative than what we would have gotten from that anyway. I think Metro.
It's considerably later in time.
Yeah, I really wonder if this has happened because Longhorn did not happen.
Well, no, I think that the thing to remember is that the world was going to change anyway, right? So if Longhorn had come to fruition, it would still be a desktop operating system. It still ran classic Windows applications, and it would still be very targeted at traditional computing devices, not at mobile devices. Microsoft doesn't want to call it this, but Windows Metro, the new touch interface, is a mobile system. It really is. I think we talked about that, the 27-inch screen, right? Where you're holding it in the corners, and when the buttons are down here in the corners, that makes sense on a little tablet. But when you're using the mouse to go back and forth, it makes no sense at all. That tells you that this thing, when they say touch first, that's what they mean.
They really do mean touch first, and I think this is going to
touch first. Yeah.
And Surface is the first example of these hybrid devices that I think will be the future of the PC market. I think the fact that you could connect this, screen to a laptop, just a body, and take it when you have to go somewhere. I mean, I think that's when it's going to become.
I think that
what everybody thinks it'll be.
The two Surface devices kind of sit in a list of devices that goes from left to right, and they sit way over on one side because basically what you've got is a tablet with a minimal keyboard that's part of a cover, which is sort of innovative in its own right, certainly, but not something that touch typists. It looks like the keyboard from the Atari 400 if you go back that far, kind of that Mylar style, maybe this works, maybe it doesn't kind of thing. The next step up from that is the Windows 8 Pro version, which has a keyboard case or cover that actually has tactile feedback. So maybe that thing will be better for people who actually have to type. But I think there's still room in the spectrum of devices for true laptops / ultrabooks, ultrabooks where the screen swivels around and it clips on and it's one thing. Yeah. Devices of many, many kinds. And the Surface devices, Microsoft described them as the beginning of a family of devices, and maybe they'll do others. But they don't answer every need. There's no 27-inch Surface screen yet, or whatever. Maybe someday there will be, but certainly it's an indication of where Microsoft feels the volume part of the market's going to be going.
Yeah,
Definitely.
yeah. A couple other things here. I'm just going down the list. We went over the release date. They spoke about IE10. They spoke about now. One of the rumors were that after the announcement, is Microsoft going to release a Windows phone, Microsoft branded Windows phone? And now we know no, they're not going. They're not planning on it.
We already knew that. I asked them that before the event. I wrote about that on last Friday. No.
I mean, a lot of the rumors were coming out, which I was actually surprised, even after they had confirmed it.
I asked them the way I said. I asked them, and the way it was answered to me, in fact, by the same Greg Sullivan, the same guy who's been quoted in more recent stories, is he said, "Look, that's why we have Nokia. The reason we had to make the Surface devices is we don't have a partner like that on the PC side. We don't have someone who actually works with us on the development of the software who also makes hardware. So that was necessitated by, the way they did things on the Windows side of the fence. So there's no reason for that. I would have, by the way, I would love to see a Nokia tablet that was designed like the look and feel of the Lumia handsets.
Yeah, that would be nice.
I would love a tablet like that.
Well, there is the influence of it, right? All the different color, the clip-on screens, the clip-on keyboards.
Yeah,
it is kind of Nokia-like in a way, and you could see the influence of that. But I wonder how the OEMs are going to deal with this over the next year or two.
You know what? I just wrote about this because, and this is just my opinion. I've not talked to anyone, but a lot of people think it's an all or nothing type of thing, right? We've got some guy from Acer saying, "Oh, they're not going to come through on this stuff. They're just going to do it for a little while." And then you have people saying, "Oh, this is changing Microsoft's business model. They're not going to partner anymore." I look at this as additive. I don't actually think they're going to change anything that they've already been doing. I mean, they're going to do their own thing, and I expect their partners to keep doing their thing. I mean, Microsoft is kind of doing a soft launch on this thing. They're not putting it out in Best Buy. They're not putting it on Amazon, wherever else people buy PCs. They're only selling it through their own stores. So it's kind of a limited availability item. with a little bit of cachet perhaps attached to it because it's from Microsoft.
Yeah, and this is how they're going to keep them happy.
Well, Microsoft's already selling signature PCs.
Yeah,
nobody's buying those. So I actually think these will sell pretty well, but I don't think that this is a major threat to any PC maker. This is just I don't remember the exact number, but during the Surface announcement, they said something north of 300 devices are going to be out by new Windows 8 or RT based devices by the end of 2013. So now there are 302, or whatever the number was.
It
really doesn't change.
The signature PCs, are they on the Microsoft online store?
Yeah, if you buy if you go to microsoftstore.com,
okay, I'm there right now.
If you browse the PCs, they're all from different manufacturers, right?
Yeah.
But what they do is they actually buy these things at retail, open the box, take them out, blow away the image that's on there, and put on their own clean Microsoft signature image, and then they sell it.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, I'm looking at them right now. I mean, there's some nice laptops on here.
Yeah, it's not bad. And so I've always felt like the signature stuff was fantastic. It's just that a lot of people don't even know it exists. The Microsoft retail stores, aren't that many of them yet, although that's, by the way, something that has been getting better this year.
Well, now there's a reason to go in there, right?
Yeah, and you can buy them online too, right? So you'll be able to go to, you can.
Well, they have phones, they have tablets, they have the laptop. I mean, they have everything that Apple does, and the reason why the Apple Store is successful, it's not because of the Apple.
They have everything but the smugness,
and the turtlenecks. Yeah, no, but in reality, if you look at it, why was the Apple Store so successful?
People like museums.
They go in, they play around with it.
It's hard to say.
Well, nobody's going in buying the computers. I mean, the reality is they were successful because of the iPods and the iPhones and now the iPads. If
Apple had stuck to selling computers, we wouldn't be talking about Apple stores today.
Yeah, it would be a totally different ballgame right now. But I find this a very interesting time for technology, and this year could be the year that really changes everything. The way that the last couple of years have been an iPad world. When we talk about tablets, we're talking about the iPad. Android is there, but they're not really doing much.
I mean, yes and no. I mean, so Apple has sold tens of millions of iPads in the past 2.5 years, whatever. PC makers sell that many computers every quarter, so it's not there yet. I mean, it's obviously it's a successful kind of device. Obviously, Microsoft feels this is very important. They're competing with it. I think that's the point. It hasn't switched. It's not like things have switched over yet, but you can kind of feel where they're heading, or at least Microsoft feels they can. So they have to address that. But I actually, for all of the weird dual interface nature of Windows 8 and Windows RT, I like the notion of a device that can do it all, that it's not just a toy like an iPad. It's not just a boring ThinkPad laptop. It's like this thing that does both, because people really are not pigeonholed into doing one thing. I'm not just someone who watches movies. I get work done too, Some people can't get work done on an iPad. I mean, obviously, some people have very limited computing needs, and that's great. So a very simple device is fine. But some people need more than that, and I think the Windows devices will span that range a lot better than the iPad can.
So with the phone now, they're kind of closer to Windows 8 than they were to the phone platform that they were using previously. How are they going to market this and combine them all together? Do they have some sort of initiative to say, like, all your devices in one source? Like, I'm just trying to. The
confusing bit is going to be how they differentiate RT and Windows 8, right?
Yeah.
Now that they've called this tablet Surface, it kind of occurs to me Surface wouldn't have been a bad name for Windows RT because it's mostly the touch interface, and that would have made some sense, Surface has a short history of being a hardware device, so they're using it for their line of devices now, and I understand the sense.
Yeah, I guess they're looking at it as, okay, well, we could call it Surface, but what's HP going to call it? They're not going to call it Surface.
No. So even within the Surface line, you've got these things that look really similar. It's only when you're literally putting them right next to each other you can see, this one's a little thicker. This one has a slightly nicer looking keyboard or whatever. So. The line is very thin the line is very serious functionally, communicating that is Microsoft's job, and I don't know how they're going to do it. I really feel like it's a lot vaguer than they suggested it was going to be. But we'll see. They haven't done it yet.
They have to have some sort of plan. I mean, and I'm sure that people have brought this up. How are we going to separate the two? How are we going to say, well, this is a Windows? This is a Windows 8.
The central pressing concern of this whole thing. There is one weird little thing going on here. If you accept the notion that Microsoft believes that the future of general purpose computing is with these devices, right, rather than like what we think of as PCs. And I think the Surface and Windows 8 and RT tell you everything you need to know about that. This casts Windows RT and the Surface, the RT version of Surface, in a very interesting light, doesn't it? You know, that there's a possibility that Microsoft feels collectively that the Windows RT system is the future, not Windows 8. You know, that we do both. In other words, people are like, why are you tacking on this ARM thing at the end of it? Why wouldn't you just do Windows 8? And it's like, well, we're only doing Windows 8 because we have to. We actually think that Windows RT is the future, and we're providing Windows 8 for backwards compatibility only. You know, I mean, they're not going to say it like that, but you have to wonder if that's
what their plan is. Yeah, because
where their heads are at. Yeah.
Well, we kind of know this is a kind of a crossroads they're at right now with the old way of running Windows and this new entirely radical interface compared to what we were doing before. They kind of had to do this. I think it would have been a big mistake for them to say, well, no, this is what you're going to get. Say goodbye to Windows. That would have been a disaster for them, PR-wise.
Well, because no one would have bought it.
No one, people would just stay with that. But you know one thing that I was thinking? These devices do not have that stigma of a first-gen device. If you think about it, you know, when Android released their operating system and when even the first-generation iPad came out, people were like, well, I'm going to hold off for the second one. I don't get that vibe from these Microsoft devices.
We're going to have to see how they are in real life. I mean, one of the big questions is, battery life, RT versus 8, performance. There's a lot of questions still. Windows RT and ARM are 32-bit only, for example. So, they don't scale up as high as, Windows 8 can.
Yeah.
So that suggests that, traditional Windows versions are going to be around for a while,
Yeah, I don't know.
It's very.
I don't know if anybody else perceives it that way. I just don't feel like these are first-gen devices. I feel that more thought was put into this, and it has to be successful in order for it to grow. If this device comes out or if Windows 8 comes out and it's not, let's say it's like a Vista where it has these bugs that they could fix later on, I don't think they'll recover from that as quickly as somebody else would. I mean, that's just how I see it. Because they're bigger and there's more expectation with this, and I think
they've been doing this forever. They know.
Yeah, and I think there's more expectation to fail in a way, right? Their back is against the wall with releasing this operating system. It's almost like people want to report that it fails more than they want to report that it's this great operating system. With reading some of these articles that are put out there, that's kind of the vibe that I get. And the same thing is attributed to what they did with Windows Phone. When Windows Phone 7 came out, these bloggers picked it up. They did an awful review on this. People said it wasn't good, it was sluggish, it wasn't a dual core, all this stuff. Windows Phone 7.5 comes out, the same reviewers are going crazy about it. And I think that's because their perception changed for who knows what reason, because Twitter was integrated. I don't know. It's fascinating to me and how people look at these products.
Well, the other thing to keep in mind is that a lot of the people who are opining about this stuff now are, enthusiasts, technical users, etc. A lot of and I've been part of it. I've written, I don't know about this UI. I don't know about how these things, there's sort of an adjustment you have to go through. And by the way, I say that from having 2 years of experience with Windows Phone. Most of the people who are approaching Windows 8 for the first time, and that's not just users, it's not just enthusiasts, it's also other reporters and bloggers, don't use Windows Phone. No. So they don't understand the whole user interface paradigm and how these things work, how things are supposed to look and all that kind of stuff. This is even worse for them. So even for someone like me who gets it, when I look at this thing and I say, I know where that came from and I recognize this from that, and I can see how this is different a little bit from the way they did it in Windows Phone, and this must be why they did it this way. Most people can't approach it from that level. And it's they just look at it and they say, this isn't Windows. I don't get this. What are you doing? Why are you forcing this touch thing on me? I'm using a big PC.
Yeah.
You got to kind of look at it from the bigger picture standpoint, and kind of get over some of your biases. And when I say you, I mean me too.
I have a lot. Listen, I have bias.
We have to do collectively.
Yeah, there are times that I see a product and I love the product because of the emotion of that product being released, and then you work with the phone for a couple of weeks or a month or so, and then you start either liking or disliking, depending. I was bashing that Galaxy Note for weeks until I've had it for long term. I think a couple of months now at this point, and I absolutely love the device. I think it's a great device. So your perception changes when you actually have on-hand experience with the device over a long period of time.
So you're suggesting that experience actually changes your opinions?
I know. It's crazy. It's a crazy thing. I actually like to use it. Yeah. I do want to touch on this Apple news that came out a couple days ago.
Was there Apple news?
There was some.
Okay.
And it's about wording. And again, let's talk about perception, right? What people perceive. A lot of people that perceive Apple as a safe computer from viruses. You don't get a virus on an Apple product.
Yeah.
But because of the flashback botnet and other malware and spyware targeting Macs, they've changed their wording on their website.
Right.
Apple has removed the previous statement, it doesn't get PC viruses, and replaced it with, it's built to be safe.
Is it? So the Apple virus thing is a little complex because if you just logically speaking, it's probably no doubt that OS X is safer than Windows, safer with air quotes. I mean, simply because it's not used by as many people and has not been hacked as much, even though there has been some high profile hacking that occurred this year finally. The number of attacks on Mac OS X compared to Windows is like a puff of wind compared to a tsunami. It's not even close. That said, the other side of that coin is that Microsoft in 2002 started its Trustworthy Computing Initiative. It stopped development of all of its operating systems and major platforms so that it could re-engineer what they were doing securely, everything. And they just reset everything. Here we are a decade later, and Microsoft has a much better set of policies in place for not just for developing software securely, but for communicating to users and for fixing things and responding to issues. Yeah. Apple is very slow and they're obtuse, and Microsoft is very fast and they're transparent. And so it's a big difference. And so I'm not going to say, thus Windows is safer, you should use Windows.
Well,
but I am going to say, thus Windows is safer and you should use Windows.
I think something else that kind of connects to this, and I was just thinking about it. How is Microsoft going to deal with the fact that the core, I guess, of Windows Phone 8 is still kind of Windows 8. So how are they? And the tablet is Windows 8.
Yeah.
So how are they going to deal with this possible issue?
Which possible issue?
That viruses that could kind of be cross-platform.
No, that's not going to happen. When I say that's not going to happen, I don't mean there's never going to be one instance where there's an event and then Microsoft has to make a change. But the Metro stuff is architected to prevent this kind of thing. Windows, like the Intel version, of Windows 8, obviously has all of the same capabilities and concerns as Windows 7 does. So you're going to need security software and all that stuff. Windows RT is a little interesting because none of that stuff is going to run on ARM, and so you don't have to worry about it, period. So from a security standpoint, Windows RT is a blank slate. But Metro is designed to do application isolation, isolation on disk of data, isolation of memory, et cetera, et cetera. So there are a lot of really low-level inherent security features that are built into the system, and then stuff that it takes advantage of just from the new hardware. So if you have a Windows RT, actually I'm not sure about Windows RT, but a Windows 8 device running on UEFI, which is the new firmware type, you get secure boot. Windows 8 has trusted boot, which protects it during boot time, and it has ongoing protection through technologies like Start Screen and what used to be called Security Essentials, which is now Windows Defender, and all of the other stuff that's in Windows around data execution protection, et cetera, et cetera. So it goes on and on and on.
The reason why I asked that is because I was reading a blog early, I think just when the announcement was done, and somebody said, how safe will Windows be with Windows 8? And they were kind of, the title, and if you didn't read it, obviously they were trying to get you to think. They're questioning it. They're trying to tell you, like, well, Now, not only can your computer get hacked, but your tablet and your phone could get hacked.
Yeah, that's not going to happen.
And I was thinking that,
it's not going to happen.
That's not going to happen. We know that, but I wonder how many people would go into a store, or go to somebody, or even think, oh well, I'm not going to buy a Windows. I'm not going to buy a Windows phone because I'll get a virus on it.
Well,
I think Microsoft's biggest battle will be to change the perception of the consumer.
Right. Part of it, when Windows Phone first came out, people looked at this thing. I did this and said, "This isn't Windows. Why would you call this Windows?" Now that you can see the Metro UI happening across a lot of their other properties, you say, "Well, okay, I see. There's this family thing going on here." I agree with you. It could be a perception issue there. Although I do think that the average consumer has a much higher opinion of Microsoft and Windows than, say, a lot of the upturned noses that you see in the tech blogosphere or whatever.
No, Paul, I've been dealing with a lot of people over the last couple of months. I've been doing some computer work on the side, and the things that people think, are just I mean, like things that like I could never imagine anybody even contemplating it, because it's such a complex thing. Where to just come up with that.
It's true that Microsoft gets blamed for anything that happens on a computer, certainly. And then maybe that's part of the rationale behind the Surface. At least this time you'd be right when you blame Microsoft. But, but it gives them a chance to nip some stuff in the bud, that some of the PC makers might have done with regards to crapware or, bad driver choices that actually, impeded the performance of the device, which, by the way, PC makers do all the time. It's kind of crazy. I don't know. That's an interesting question.
Here's
there's a lot to be said that Windows Phone maybe should be called something else.
Well, here's another thing. I mean, Android is, the number one selling mobile phone, right? The number one selling platform for a mobile phone, because they've saturated the market with a new phone every single week. They have phones that vary from $1 to zero to all the way to $400. So they've kind of saturated this market, and a lot of people are running it. How are people? That is a far less secure platform to be in.
Right. Well, I think people, but they're used to this, right? I think people have this notion, whether it's correct or not, I think it's incorrect these days, that Windows is kind of insecure, but it does all this stuff, and that's, we put up with it, It's why we use Facebook, or not why we use Facebook, but the same rationale we use when we say we use Facebook. Android, I think, falls into the same category. It's like, well, I get this thing sort of unsafe or whatever, but it's customizable. It's less expensive. Whatever it is. People.
I love looking at people's apps on their phones, and you can really learn a lot about somebody when you look at their apps. Like, and Android users, and I'm an Android user. Listen, I don't want to bash on Android too much. I use Android. I actually don't mind Android. I think it's far more open than iOS. I also like iOS a lot, and I also like Windows Phone. I think they all do a great job of what they're doing. But whenever I pick up let's say a iPhone user's phone, most of the time these people are not downloading any apps, and I find that hysterical. The fact that you're buying this phone which highlights apps, and you have no apps on there. Like my wife doesn't download any apps. She likes the phone, but does not use any apps. She has like 2 or 3 apps. But the Android user will download every single app known to exist in this app store. I was fixing somebody's phone. They gave me the phone, and it was totally, messed up. And they had like 500 apps, and they had the Simpsons soundboard and the Are You Ugly Meter app. And I was finding that very interesting, that Android users go out and download more than from what I've seen from iOS users. And I'm curious to know if that's something that has to do with each other, if it's just the fact that you can do it and it's open, or the user. I don't know, Paul. What do you think?
I don't know.
Do you think it's the
people even
user?
think like that? Like it's open, I don't know. I think this is another area where people who are sort of influencers or enthusiasts, sort of assume that the whole world works the way they do. I thought about this the other day because I was updating the What I Use article, and I thought, I should really devote some space in here, or think about reorganizing this a little bit, right? Because I use certain software when I'm sitting here in front of my desktop computer. When I go onto a laptop, it's a lot of the same software, obviously, but a lot less software. And then when I'm on the phone, I I really don't do much with the phone. And I don't mean that like I don't use it. I mean, I really don't spend a lot of time looking in the App Store looking for apps. I don't really care about stuff like that. There's only a really small handful of apps that I care about. I don't represent everybody either, you know? And so I think there are certain people who are going to be like me. I think there are certain people who are going to have 285 apps on their phone intricately, installed in different places and arranged different ways. But
from what I have seen, I have noticed that Android users download far more apps than iOS users. I don't know about Windows Phone because I know maybe 2 or 3 people with a Windows phone, and you're one of them.
Yep.
So I can't really tell how they do. But I know for a fact Android users download every single app that they could possibly find.
That must be hard because there's so many of them. I just don't care.
Yeah.
You know,
But I wonder if it's like not to say you're old, Paul, but I wonder if it's an age thing also.
No, Windows Phone in particular, I spent a lot of time early on downloading everything, just to kind of look at it, play around with it. But I just find from my own, we were out in San Francisco with a group of guys, and we had, to me, I just use one thing for everything. So like the way I think about stuff is, if I'm going to communicate through an online service with people, I'm going to use Twitter because that's how you do things like that. And if I'm going to communicate with people I know, friends and family, I'm going to use Facebook. So if I go to a place that I feel is notable, I'm going to check in on Facebook, But then there's like guys, they've got like Foursquare on the Foursquare app. They've got this thing, and they've got all these different things for different things. And it's like
it's too much work.
It's just it's inefficient and it's pointless. And but to me, again, everyone's different. I sort of respect that and understand it, but I think that stuff shakes out. I think naturally over time, in the early 1980s, there were probably 9 or 10 different computer platforms. It basically went down to 2. I think, we have a bunch of different smartphone platforms. It's eventually going to go down to 2 or 3. We have hundreds of thousands of apps. There's like 12, that people really need.
I mean, that's the truth. And I'm going to look at my Android phone. There's probably, I use my Twitter app, my Facebook app, Google Voice.
But not counting the built-in stuff. Right?
Okay, so
like in other words, you get the phone and you're thinking, okay, I just got this. I have to install some stuff.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll tell you what it is.
To finish it off. Like what are those things?
Facebook, Twitter.
Yep.
Stitcher Radio.
Yeah,
I use Stitcher every single day if I'm on the go. It's an internet radio.
Actually, let's. I do this. So same thing. Facebook and Twitter on the Windows Phone. Stitcher Radio I don't do because I use Zune Pass.
Okay. But see, I use it for streaming podcasts. Like if I'm
podcasts. Like, all right, so I use the built-in podcast app that's in Windows Phone.
Skype.
Okay, I actually have installed Skype, but Skype is worthless on Windows Phone.
Dropbox.
No, because I use SkyDrive, but
I installed
SkyDrive.
That. Okay.
I do install the app. I technically don't need it, but I do install the app.
Yeah. Let's see what else. Reddit. I like Reddit. I have the Reddit app.
Reddit, for the site.
Okay.
So now I don't care about Reddit personally.
Now it gets a little obscure. Now it gets into the Android IRC app.
Okay, so but you're off the deep end.
So, yeah, so I'm totally off the deep end. So Instagram. And Flipboard.
There's a category of app. I would call them like newsreader type apps. I use something called Flux, which is basically like a front end to Google Reader. I have apps for like the New York Times and for Associated Press, stuff like that. So like kind of like Blogger, news, feed, whatever. I mean, those are all the same.
Like Flipboard just got released. I installed Flipboard. I mean, if I were to count it, if I were to guess, maybe at most 5 to 10 apps. At most. That I would use on a regular basis. And that's pushing it. I mean, that's going to the most that I could possibly use. The rest I have redundant apps. Like I have different podcasting apps to test those out, which actually some news just came out. Apple's releasing their own podcasting app for iOS.
Yeah, there was a rumor of that.
Yeah, now it's been, I guess, with the latest version of iOS 6, the beta 2, it's a new version of it.
I'm not sure if that's good or bad, by the way.
Why don't we touch on that a little bit? Most people, and I did this after we did Tech News Weekly on Friday, and this was one of the stories that is it going to be disappearing? And I said, well, it's still a beta. It's the first beta 1. It could just be that they didn't put it in, or something happened and it's not in there. But let's say if they were to put their own app, will people use it, or do people know that they could get podcasts on their iOS and iTunes on their actual phone. I asked my wife, I said, hey, Jess, can you do me a favor? Can you go and download the podcast? Can you go download any one of my podcasts on iOS? She had no clue how to do this. She's like, is it in iTunes? I'm like, yeah. She's like, okay, so do I buy the music? I'm like, yeah, so you got to go to the music app. So she went back. She went to the music app. Let me just.
Yeah. Right. So
no. I'm sorry. She went to iTunes. Then
right.
she's like, where do I go?
Podcast might not be one of the ones that's out in the toolbar by default.
No, you got to click on more.
One more.
And then when you click on more, you could get, audiobooks, podcasts, and then you could find the podcast in there.
So this is gonna make it like iBooks. It'll put it out front a little bit more. Maybe it's good,
Yeah, I think this is not a bad thing. I know people are freaking out over this. But they're also adding.
So, for example, on Windows Phone or Windows, I guess, Windows 8 doesn't have a built-in podcast capability. Yeah. There's a music app, but it does not have podcasts.
And by the way, you could download this right now. They just put out the standalone app, iOS 5.1 plus.
Okay, I'm going to avoid doing that. But so on Windows Phone, they have something called Music Plus Videos, which is like a hub. And it combines the music and the videos app, and it has podcasting. And my understanding is that in Windows Phone 8, they're going to leave that there, and that Microsoft believes that for now, the primary use of podcasts is for people who are on the go, that they'll use it on these mobile devices and not on a personal computer. So and that going on Windows 8 was not a huge priority.
Yeah, and we've noticed that, and I spoke to Rob, and he didn't even have a clear answer on what they're planning on doing in the long run.
There
was just, this is what they're planning on doing right now.
Yeah, he can't really obviously talk about whatever future plans they may have. But
the internet is in an uproar, but most people have no clue what the hell a podcast is. They have no idea. They have no idea. Do you know how many times people have asked me what I do for a living, and I don't know how to respond to them?
Sure.
Because it's like, oh, I do radio. Okay. What station are you on? Well, it's not really a station. It's on the internet. Oh, okay. So how do I listen to it? Well, you got to download it. Do you have iOS? And then you go through this whole thing. So I still think the mainstream has no clue what a podcast is, and they really don't care. But it is interesting that they just released this app.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately for iOS, doing this may. Oh, God, what an awful looking user interface. Well, anyway, it may just put it more out front and center. The problem maybe was that in iTunes or in the music app, these things were just too well hidden before.
Yes, the funny thing is that when you search podcasts, it does not come up in iOS. Stitcher's the first app that comes up, which is really funny.
Right.
Yeah, this is going to be interesting. All right, Paul, let's start wrapping it up. Why don't we do our 10-year game?
Okay.
And I don't know if I wrote it down or not.
You did.
I did.
It's at the top.
Okay, let me go.
Yeah.
Yes, how will we communicate with each other? So we've been talking about phones and we've been talking about tablets a lot. We touched on voice over IP stuff. But in 10 years, what will be the way that we communicate? Now, if we go back 10 years to 2002, text messaging was still not that popular.
Right.
It was just starting to get there. I think 2003, 2004 is really when it started picking up. So a lot has changed in the last 10 years. Nobody calls each other. Everybody types to each other now. So what's going to happen with communication? Are we going to still be texting? Are we going to be using different types of platforms? I think, I attribute a lot of this to BlackBerry. BlackBerry helped out big time. And Palm was sending a text message because it was miserable, typing on those number keys.
Right.
So what do you think is going to happen over the next 10 years with the way we communicate? We've seen FaceTime attempt to, change the way that we talk to each other. Skype has been doing this with video conferencing. I, for one, do not think people want to see each other when they talk to each other.
Yeah, okay.
Ever.
Sure.
I don't want to see anybody ever.
Yeah, some people do.
Some people do, yeah. So what do you think? I want
I just had this conversation with my daughter last night. Coincidentally, we were out walking, and I think my wife asked her, do you know what a pager is? And she didn't. And when our first kid was born, we bought a pager, and we gave the number to our babysitter. And so if we went out and the baby was home, that if something happened, they could call us. To my knowledge, I don't think we ever used the pager even once. I'm not sure.
It's so funny. I just asked my brother 2 days ago, my younger brother, which we have an 11-year difference. I asked him, I'm like, do you know what a beeper is?
Yeah.
And he goes, that's what drug dealers used to have in the 90s.
Sure.
I'm like, or doctors and nurses, but yeah, I guess.
Yeah. Or just parents in my case.
Yeah.
So she found that really, humorous because, she grew up in this modern world with communications devices and all this kind of stuff. And she was saying, oh, I wonder if I will someday ask my kid if they know what a phone is or, whatever. And it's interesting because I think the way this stuff is going to go, not to get too Star Trek on you, but I mean, I almost feel like there's going to be pervasive computing and communications as part of it, capabilities just kind of everywhere, that a lot of us, travel and we load up our laptop or our iPad or whatever with, a couple of movies. And obviously some airlines have that kind of stuff on demand or whatever, but that there'll be some computing device built into the back of the chair. And if you subscribe to HBO at home, you can watch an HBO TV show through your own account over the plane's, built-in thing. And that this stuff will just kind of be available everywhere. And that notion of, people are so concerned with their own things, whether it's like their MP3 collection or their phone or their whatever it is, they want to bring it to work. And, that we just stop worrying about this stuff. It's just everywhere.
Well, lots changed. I mean, can you imagine 20 years ago, we didn't take our movies on a plane. What do we do? No. What did we do when we were sitting on a train?
We were happy, damn it. That's
well, I mean, we weren't talking, we weren't texting.
I was watching an old TV show today. There was a scene where a security guard is, checks the computer, the systems are all good. He gets up on his stool, opens his book, and he starts reading. And I'm thinking to myself, I did a lot of that, obviously. I mean, I love books, I've loved to read. But how limiting is that? I mean, what if he finishes reading the book? He's stuck in this place all night long. He's like a security guard. So he can't download a new book or whatever, or start a new book. He's got a book, But again, that falls into the same thing. I mean, you'll be reading an Amazon Kindle book or whatever it is, or an iBook or whatever you choose to do through that same seatplane. I mean, Microsoft has this thing. I have it here somewhere. I was just playing with it, like a USB to go device that has an entire computing environment on it. All you need to do is plug it into a device, and that's cool, but you bring it around with you. I mean, why can't that thing just be broadcast to wherever you are, and you just in your environment, you have all your stuff, it's all there.
See, I think my whole thing is that I fear that the way that we communicate is, I think it's not going to be text messaging, it's not going to be email, I think it's just going to be social networks.
Oh, jeez.
I think we have changed as a society. We're so open about everything. We were so concerned with privacy, and we still are. We're a society that's so concerned with privacy, and Facebook is doing this with the photos and that, but we are not a private people anymore. We post everything and anything on the internet, and this is all documented. Everything is there.
Not all of us. I mean,
a lot of people. I mean, let's talk about.
I think there's going to be a backlash against that as well. I mean, I think a lot of the people who do what you're talking about are younger, don't understand the ramifications of what they're doing, and that this requires a generation where there's going to be a wake-up call someday. And that, maybe we'll put it.
Yeah, I mean, that's also another thing. They might turn around and say, I cannot believe we did this. I can't believe we said all
I know
this.
they will. I know they will.
Because I always tell my brothers, when I was in high school, if we had YouTube, then I mean, or we had social networks. Let's say we had Facebook and Twitter. I would be screwed now. Because the things that
plus you would never leave the room.
But I'm saying, but in terms of going out and doing things and posting all this crazy stuff you do when you're young, it's not necessarily a good thing, but people are doing it and everything is documented. Your entire life is out there. I think that
when I was a young guy, if you were lucky, maybe not lucky is not the right word, but if maybe someone happened to have a camera, right, at some stupid event, you were all drinking or getting stupid or whatever. Someone has a camera, so at one out of every 10 or 20 events, someone has a camera.
Yeah.
And they take some pictures. And they sit on the roll because you're not going to bring that thing in until the roll is full because that's how it works.
Yeah.
And then sometimes the roll comes out of the camera and never goes in because that's also how that works. So sometimes you bring the roll into the place and you never pick it up because that is sometimes how it worked. And then, you see the pictures, but
nobody else does.
Hand them to someone else. No one else.
3 years have gone by.
Yeah, no one publishes these things. I mean, so my sister might come to visit recently. It's like, oh, Beth, I have these embarrassing pictures of you when you were a teenager, but they're nowhere. They're not, and I don't actually.
Yeah, listen, we just developed pictures from our wedding. When we did at our wedding, and we're going back. I mean, 2008. We had disposable cameras on everybody's desk, everybody's table, and we said, okay, take pictures and just put them there, and we'll develop them.
Sure.
We just developed them. And it's been 5 years almost, 4.5 years.
You're lucky they were still there.
Yeah.
Did you hear about the most recent thing with weddings, by the way?
No, what are they doing?
They give out, I don't know how they do it exactly, if they tell people they can message a certain number or however it works, but these messages go out on a giant digital board at the wedding.
Oh, that's
so you
really
can
cool.
say cute little things. So it's like kind of a social networking thing at a wedding. But of course, what really happens at weddings is that people start making snarky comments about other women and how they've gained weight or how they look ugly in that dress or whatever. And then those messages go out on that big board.
The bride could lose a couple pounds.
And, right. And so they have to shut it down, So this, obviously, stupidity can be had.
See, and this is the amazing thing. Though I'm involved in technology, I did not Facebook until 2008.
No, I kind of resisted it too. Actually. I mean,
like right after my wedding, I remember I started Facebooking. Like I never tweeted, I never did Twitter, I never did that. I had a MySpace, but I wasn't.
It's important that you refer to it in a slightly old-fashioned way. You have to say like I do the Facebook.
I do the Facebook. I put the in front of everything. That's
I'm
one of the
Twittering occasionally.
I do the Twitter. I do the Facebook. But I think, listen, in my opinion, communication has totally changed. If you were to tell, and I have older relatives, and they turn around and go, yeah, this is great. Rather than calling somebody, you're typing to them now. Like, wow, state of the art. We've gone backwards. We're just writing letters again, like shorthand letters. That's it.
That's not so horrible. I mean, there was a certain nice thing about letters, like actual letters. My wife's grandmother, before she died, would call occasionally, and she would compose a voice machine recording like a letter. She would say, "Dear Stephanie," and then she would say her little message, and then she would say, "Love, Grandma."
Yeah.
I mean, it was cute.
This was, and actually we're winding down and we're getting off top, but I got a Christmas card from you. You were the only one that sent me a Christmas card this year.
Oh, really? Did you just get it?
I know. No. I had it,
okay.
and it was sitting on the mantle. And Jess and I were laughing how this is the only Christmas card that we got
from the old-fashioned people.
So now I look forward. If you stop, then I have nobody left.
Right. I won't stop.
Very depressing Christmas. It'll be the worst Christmas ever. But no, I think in the way that we're going with communication, it's totally evolved and it's totally changed. Even over the last 3 years. We have friends from France who used to send us a video in the mail on disc, like they would make a DVD. A couple of years back, he changed to like a downloadable video. It was in an email. You could click on it and download the video. And now, of course, they just publish it to YouTube, and I think they share it with everybody.
I don't actually, I hope not, but you can view it on YouTube, and it's like what an interesting change of events, and that's how they do their holiday thing. The French send out holiday cards in January, I guess, after the holiday, not after Christmas. But they do like a video thing, and that's cool. It's not the type of thing I would do. It's not the amount of effort I would go to, I guess, but it's neat. It's a neat thing.
I don't want to see anybody for the holidays. I just want to sit in the dark. That's what I want.
with a drink and my Christmas card.
Yeah, just staring at it, really angry.
Right.
I can see it now. All right, Paul, let's wrap it up.
All righty.
We didn't do our Audible pick, but we'll do it next week.
Okay.
We didn't get to it. You can go to our website, guysfromqueens.com. This was our time was off for this show. We start at 2 p.m. Generally start at 4 p.m. East. But today we start at 2 p.m. because I have to go to a work thing for my wife. Those social things that sometimes get in the way of life. But if you miss any portion of the show, I know people are just starting to tune in now, and they're saying, hey, what happened? I thought the show starts at 4. We're going to be replaying it right after we're done, but we're also going to have it posted on our website at gfqnetwork.com. Paul also posts the website at winsupersite.com. I do want to tell you guys one thing. We changed the way we do our RSS for the show. I know a lot of people have been experiencing problems with the video feed on the Zune and the iTunes. So please let us know. Give us feedback if it's working now. We tweak some stuff. We're changing the encoding. We're working on it. And we're also upgrading the audio again. So if the audio is a little low, give us another week or so, and I think we're going to fix it. Also, subscribe to us and comment. It helps, guys. Paul, anything for you? Nothing else? Oh, yeah, Windows Weekly. Thursdays. That show. Windows Weekly every Thursday on the Twin Network. Paul does a show on Windows. It'd be funny if it wasn't about Windows and it was actually about like real Windows, literally right. Windows.
I wonder if people ever tune in hoping that's what it is.
I wonder how many times people have put in like Googled like Windows, like 1 week Windows supplies, and there's Paul's face. It could happen.
It could happen.
Until next time, guys. Good night. We'll see you next week.